Hello, Mrs. Button's class. We are so happy to be your mystery readers today. I'm Anna, and soon you'll meet my husband Dan. We are Sophia Warner's grandma and papa.
Today we are going to read you two stories from The Adventures of Fern Hollow. Sophia's daddy and his brothers and sisters always loved these stories when they were young kids like you guys. And we hope that you'll enjoy them just as much as they did.
Adventures in Fern Hollow. So we are going to show you, this is a map of Fern Hollow. And you can see the whole entire Fern Hollow. And we're going to concentrate our story today. The first story is going to be about Mr. Rusty's house, which is located right here on the river. And the second story is going to involve Trundleberry Manor, way over here on the top of the river.
Okay, turn the page, Grandma.
And now for our first story. It's called Mr. Rusty's New House. And there's Mr. Rusty. One morning, Rufus Rusty woke up with something dripping on his forehead. Plip, plip, plip. "Oh no," cried Rufus to his brother Redvers, who was in the lower bunk. "The roof is leaking." "Never mind," giggled Redvers. "I'm quite dry down here." Rufus leapt out of his soggy bed and ran to tell his mother and father. But they were already running around with pots and pans, trying to catch all the rain, which was leaking into their bedroom. It was the same in Dusty's room. "It's hardly worth having a roof at all if it's going to leak like this," said Mrs. Rusty. Eventually, Mr. Rusty managed to find enough pots and pans to catch all the drips. Then, after eating his breakfast, he set off for work at the railroad station, where he was the engine driver. As he left, Mr. Rusty closed the front door behind him, and it fell off. All day long, things went wrong with Mr. Rusty's house. Soot fell down the chimney, the windows stuck and wouldn't open, and Mrs. Rusty fell through the floorboards, which had become rotten. "Oh, how I wish we had a new house," she moaned. That night, there was a terrible thunderstorm. Lightning flashed around the sky, and it rained cats and dogs. In the morning, the river Ferny, which had become swollen with all the rain, overflowed and rushed down into the hollow where Mr. Rusty's house stood. The water crept up higher and higher until at last Mr. Rusty and his family had to climb up on the roof. When Mr. Periwinkle, the mailman, came riding down their lane and saw Mr. Rusty and his family all perched on their cottage roof, he was so surprised that he fell off his bicycle. "Don't worry, Mr. Rusty," cried Mr. Periwinkle, scrambling to his feet. "I'll ride over to the fire station and get Alfonso Duff and Mr. Bouncer. They'll know what to do." The Fern Hollow firemen soon arrived and began the rescue operation, extending the ladder on top of the fire engine all the way across the floodwater to the Rusty family's roof. Rufus and Redvers thought it was all great fun until they both lost their balance as they were climbing along the ladder and fell in the water. Mr. Prickles had been watching the rescue, and realizing that the Rusty family would now have nowhere to live, he invited them to stay with him for a while. The kind hedgehog soon made a nice warm fire, and Mrs. Prickles gave each of the foxes a bowl of steaming hot soup. Later in the day, Mr. Rusty heard a lot of noise outside Mr. Prickles' house and went outside to see what was happening. A little further down the lane, Brock Gruffy and a few other animals had started to build Mr. Rusty a new house. Mr. Rusty set to work himself at once. There was plenty to be done, hammering and sawing, cement to make, and bricks to lay. It was a lucky thing for Mr. Rusty and his family that they had so many good friends to help them. It took quite a long time to build a house, but after each day a little more was done. The walls grew up and the roof was put on. The tiles were laid and the windows and doors were fitted, and at last Mr. Rusty's new house was finished. Of course, all the furniture from the flooded house was useless, but Mrs. Rusty's friends gave her bits and pieces from their own homes, and Mr. Chips the woodman arrived with lots of tables and chairs and cupboards, which he had made. That night, Mr. Rusty held a housewarming party to thank all of his friends for their kind help. It was a very jolly party. The air around Mr. Rusty's new house was filled with the sound of singing and laughter, and the lights of the windows twinkled merrily in the darkness. And that's the end of Mr. Rusty's new house.
Good morning, boys and girls, and we're going to read this second book here, The Tales from Fern Hollow. This is Spike and the Cowboy Band. And here's the map of Fern Hollow. And today's adventure is going to be, a lot of it's going to happen way over here on in the Jolly Vole Hotel, which is like right on the River Ferny. Remember last night's the other story was had to do with Mr. Rusty's house? Yes. And there's some practicing that's going to happen, and it's going to happen up here in Trundleberry Manor. That's right. And also, we'll visit with Sigmund Swamp over at his house. Sigmund Swamp happens to be a music teacher. How do you like that? And then also, at the very end, at the Brambles Farm, out in one of his fields, is where the whole festival is going to happen. And that's the map, and that's where everything is. Wow, that's really cool. Okay. And this is Spike and the Cowboy Band. How do you like that? Wow. Okay. Spike Willowbank was on his way to see Sigmund Swamp for his music lesson. Spike played the violin and was looking forward to performing in the Fern Hollow Music Festival later that week. The hedgehog turned a corner and in the lane was surprised by a couple of his friends who were racing down the hill in their go-karts and almost knocked him over. "Hello, Spike," said Patch. "Come and play on the carts with us." "Sorry, I can't," said Spike. "I have to go to my music lesson." "Yuck," said Patch. "Music is boring." "Yes," agreed Monty. "Go-karts are much more fun." And Spike wondered if his friends might be right, but he continued on his way to Sigmund's house. Oh, he's going for his music lesson. "Good morning, Spike," said Sigmund. "Are you looking forward to the music festival?" "Oh, yes, of course," replied Spike, though he now was not so sure. "Jolly good," said the toad. "Let me hear a piece that you've been practicing." Spike began to play, but after a time his concentration was broken by a loud snoring noise. He glanced across at Sigmund and discovered that he had fallen fast asleep. "Oh dear," sighed Spike. "This must be a very boring piece of music if it puts my teacher to sleep." I don't know. If that ever happened to me when I was at a music lesson. I can't remember. At Trundleberry Manor, the Fern Hollow Brass Band was practicing their contribution to the music festival. "Yes, that was very good," said Lord Trundle. And when the band stopped playing, "I think the festival will be a great success. As well as the band, there will be all the other contributions. Mr. Periwinkle will play his flute. There will be the recorder group, and Spike Willowbank will play his violin.
I agreed. Said Brock Gruffy. It will be very entertaining, but it would be nice if we could think of something to make it a little different this year. You're right, said Lord Trundle. Listen, I think I have an idea.
I wonder what his idea is.
Lord Trundleberry. The next day, Spike and his friends were fishing in the River Ferny when Jingle's taxi stopped by the Jolly Vole Hotel. They all watched as Jingle opened the door for his passengers, and they stepped out. There were 4 animals dressed like cowboys. One of them, a raccoon, tipped Jingle, and then they all disappeared into the hotel. "Wow," cried Patch. "They look great. I wonder if they're real cowboys." What are these cowboys carrying? Looks like they're carrying musical instruments, doesn't it? Oh, yes, they were. Look at that. That night, as Spike lay in bed, he heard music drifting across from the Jolly Vole Hotel. It was the sort of music that cowboys play. "Of course," said Spike, "they are a cowboy band, and that's wonderful." Spike was very excited. He crept out of his house and ran down the lane to the hotel. The music was coming from one of the upstairs rooms, so Spike clambered up the tree and peeped in through the window. See him peeping in through the window? Yes, there he is. The band was practicing. They sounded marvelous. The music was very jolly, the sort of thing that you would want to make you dance. And in fact, Spike began to rock and jingle around in the tree. That was a mistake because suddenly the hedgehog lost his balance and fell. Fortunately, his pajamas caught on a branch, and he was left dangling high above the ground. "Help!" cried Spike. "Somebody get me down!" The landlord of the Jolly Vole and the cowboy band quickly came rushing out to see what all of the noise was about. "Don't worry, partner," shouted Rip, the band leader. "I'll get you down." And Rip at once began to shinny up the tree. Oh, Rip's the raccoon, isn't he? He climbed out onto the branch on which Spike was caught and pulled him up, and everyone cheered, but the next moment there was a loud crack and the branch broke, and they both fell down to the ground. Spike was all right. He landed on top of Rip, who broke his fall. But the raccoon himself was not so lucky. He had badly hurt one of his arms. So Dr. Bushy came in and put it in a sling. "I'm afraid you won't be able to play the fiddle for a while," he said. "Darn it," said Rip. "Lord Trundle invited us here to play in your music festival. What are we going to do now?" "I can play the violin," said Spike. Perhaps you could teach me some of your music, and I could be in the cowboy band." "Well, I guess we could try it," agreed Rip. The next day was the music festival day, and Mr. Chips the carpenter had built a little bandstand in one of Farmer Bramble's fields. The Fern Hollow Brass Band played their music there all afternoon, and later in the evening came the special event, the barn dance. "And now," cried Lord Trundle, "I give you Spike and the cowboy band." Spike had managed to learn the music. Though Rip couldn't play the fiddle, he could still call for the dances, and the Fern Hollow animals had a real hoedown. You can just imagine how impressed Spike's friends were. They certainly never said anything about music being boring ever again. And that's the end. And here we are at the map.
Thank you, boys and girls, for letting us be your mystery readers today. We hope you enjoyed those 2 adventures in Fern Hollow. And we wish all of you a very happy Easter this week, and especially Sophia Warner. We love you. Mwah. Have a happy Easter, and thanks, guys. Bye.